We are starting a series here in March called It Matters. It Matters is all about stewardship, stewarding what God has given us well because it matters. And this morning we are speaking specifically about stewarding our moments well. Something either matters to you, has importance, or you are indifferent to it and it holds no value to you. So the word indifference and not caring mean the same thing. Seeing this in the bigger picture of our vision this year, beyond these walls, being a disciple, making disciples, the first step to being a disciple or making disciples is to care. Because if you don't care, you're not going to do anything and you're not going to be anything. Also, because this is quite a practical series, it matters. And speaking about stewardship, it's something that we can do. We can put action to it. Throughout my preach, I'm going to throw out some questions that I encourage you. Take out your phone or notebook or whatever you have to write down notes, and especially these questions, because these are questions that you can go home and reflect on. None of the questions are intended to make you feel guilty or bad. It's actually just there for you to be like, where am I in this stance? Is there something that I want to change? Is there something I want to improve? Where am I, kind of thing. So just keep that in mind, write down the questions, and I encourage you to go back to them and actually reflect upon them. The first question is, do you care about your journey of Christianity? If you are saved and you know Jesus, do you care about the title Christianity, that you are seen as a representative and ambassador of Christ? Do you care about the responsibility that you carry to spread the gospel? Do you care about doing things like getting into whatever that means to you? Do you care about your Christian journey? The second question is, do you care about the direction that your life is headed? Do you plan to be in places that position you so that you can know the will of God? Do you care about the direction that your life is headed? Let me not plant any more seeds in your head. Do you care about what you are breaking or building for your children or for the next generation? You may not have children of your own, but there's a generation that's coming after you that's also your responsibility. Do you care about what you're building or what you're breaking for them? And lastly, do you care about people who are currently destined to go to hell? God has called us to love Him and love one another. When we do not love, it means that we are indifferent. There's a quote that says, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference, which I think is so hectic. I'm going to read to you an excerpt from the 1999 White House speech, and it speaks about indifference. And I thought it brought it across so well, better than I could say it. So I want to read it, and it will be on the screen as well. It is on the longer end, but just stick with it. It really has some good things. Also keep in mind, it's a worldly speech. It didn't come out of a church. It's a worldly speech, but it does explain indifference very well. It reads as follows. What is indifference? Etymologically, the word means no difference, a strange and unnatural state in which the lines blur between light and darkness, dusk and dawn, crime and punishment, cruelty and compassion, good and evil. What are its causes and inescapable consequences? Is it a philosophy? Is there a philosophy of indifference that's conceivable? Can one possibly view indifference as a virtue? Is it necessary at times to practice indifference, simply to keep one's sanity, live normally, enjoy a fine meal and a glass of wine, as the world around us experiences harrowing upheavals? Of course, indifference can be tempting, but more than that, seductive. It is so much easier to look away from the victims. It is so much easier to avoid such rude interruptions to our work, our dreams, our hopes. It is, after all, awkward, troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. Yet, for the person who is indifferent, his or her neighbor are of no consequence, and therefore their lives are meaningless. Look at this in the mind of the Bible, where God says we are called to love one another. Yet for the person who is indifferent, who doesn't care, his or her neighbor are of no consequence, and therefore their lives are meaningless. Their hidden or even visible anguish is of no interest. Indifference reduces the other to an abstraction. And let's pay attention to this last bit. In a way, to be indifferent to that kind of suffering is what makes the human being inhumane. Indifference, after all, is more dangerous than anger and hatred. Anger can at times be creative. One writes a great poem, a great symphony. One does something special for the sake of humanity because one is angry at the injustice that one witnesses. But indifference is never creative. Even hatred at times may elicit a response. You fight it, you denounce it, you disarm it. Indifference elicits no response. Indifference is not a response. Indifference is not a beginning, it is an end, and therefore indifference is always the friend of the enemy, for it benefits the aggressor, never its victim, whose pain is magnified when he or she feels forgotten. Indifference, I believe, is one of the greatest threats to us being disciples or making disciples. Because if we want to be or we want to do the will of God, we need to care about the people around us. We do live in a country where we are often exposed to poverty, to people struggling, that it almost becomes something we don't really even notice anymore. Because how many times a week do you see a person at a robot begging? I am guilty of it, that sometimes I don't make eye contact because I'm like, it's so awkward that I look you in the eye, but then I don't have money, and that thing. But could we give them the respect, the dignity of just looking them in the eye and smiling? Maybe saying an encouraging word. Maybe giving money if you feel led. I'm not saying we have to do that. I think sometimes we forget that we have people around us, possibly even in this room, who don't have enough food to feed their family, who maybe don't have a job that can provide for them, kids without access to education, kids raising kids because parents have left or parents have died. And if we're a Christian in this room, I think there's many days that go by that we don't really even, and I'm not saying every day, but there are days that go by that we don't even consider the fact that we have family and friends and colleagues, the waiter that brings your food in a restaurant, the car guard that watches your car so it doesn't get stolen, who are on a one-way ticket to hell. And we just don't care. We've become cold because we're exposed to hardship so often. But this morning, even though this isn't the most encouraging part of my preach, that's for sure, but it's a real one. This morning is a call to care again, to not be indifferent. We cannot steward our moments well if we don't care. One of the questions that, again, you can write down and reflect on later is, what do you care about? It might seem like a silly question, like asking a 2-year-old what they want to be when they grow up. But what you care about actually says a lot about you. They often say what you like to do and what people like you to do often leads you to your purpose. So what you care about is important. I realized this week something, again, I was reminded that I really care about. I work for an organization where I mainly work with baby homes, where we have a home for abandoned and abused children. But then last year I got involved with a project for a respite center in the community of Zandspruit for disabled children. So that project we worked on for around 8 months, and it's gotten going, and we have the right staff there and everything. So I don't get to be at that classroom or at that respite center too often because of my other responsibilities. But this week I got to go there, and as I was in that classroom, I wasn't even there for a long time. When I got out of there, I was like on fire. I said to you, I was like, we have to do this, and Caleb was in the car as well. I don't see him right now, but I was like, I have to come here more often, and I want to be here all the time. And I could feel that is something that I care about. So I want to use that as an example. What is it that makes you feel alive? When you do it or when you're around it, you're like, yes, I want more of this. What do you care about? And then the second question is, what do you want to become more sensitive to, paying attention to, not being indifferent about? What prayer should you maybe pray? Lord, break my heart for this, the way that it breaks yours. What do you no longer want to be indifferent about? We have no idea what a single moment, especially a moment that we attribute value to, can do. We have no idea what a single moment can do. In 1972, a mathematician and meteorologist named Edward Lorenz came upon a theory that he called the butterfly effect. Lorenz was studying the weather patterns and conducting experiments on a model of the Earth's atmosphere. While doing one of his simulations, he made a very, very small adjustment by rounding one of the decimals from, pay attention to this, point. I don't know about you, but when I'm making sums, I'm like, it's 1,200 point nothing. The points don't really matter. But he rounded off 0.506127 to 0.506. That's 100th of a decimal change. This showed major changes in the eventual outcome of the weather simulations, to which he famously remarked, "Does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas?" This statement and discovery summarizes the idea that something seemingly small can have a much larger effect than originally expected. Today I want to speak about the possible butterfly effect of moments lived with the intention of being a disciple and making disciples. What could it look like if we intentionally live to use our moments for the good of God? I have a little bit of an illustration that I want to do this morning. So I'm going to be telling you two stories. They have a few linkages, so hopefully I can keep it concise enough for you to not get confused about what I'm saying. So if you're really confused, put up your hand and I'll be like, okay, backtrack. But every time that I stick a butterfly onto this blank canvas, I would like you to see it as a representation of a moment. So each butterfly represents a moment. And the first story starts in this church in 1996. Is that right? In 1996, Paul and Tara, right here, got married in this church, which I think is so awesome. It was the year after I was born. So you guys aren't old at all. I can say that because of I don't know, Tara's going to give me a hiding afterwards. I'm joking. So Paul and Tara got married in this church, and shortly after, they had a daughter, and her name is Jessie. Some of you may even know Jess. And Jessie and I, the first moment was them getting married. I forget to stick the stickies. They had a daughter named Jessie. Jessie then grew up to go to Monument Primary School, where her and I met. So that was another moment. That was probably around between 2004 and 2006. We were trying to figure it out yesterday. We're not sure. Between grade 1 and grade 3, we became friends. So that was a moment. And because we became friends, I spent a lot of time in their house. And Paul and Tara became like second parents to me, and Andy a second brother, except for that one incident, but we won't bring it up. I'm kidding. And they became like a second family to me. So I obviously came to church where they were members. I came to church with them on weekends that they were here at church. And long story short, eventually I ended up in the youth ministry because of their influence. And at the youth ministry, I got invited to a camp called Riot. So Riot was, how many rioters are here? How does it go? What? Is on, no, riot, the roof is on fire. We don't, no, because the devil is a liar. It was long ago, okay? I'm realizing how old I am too. But anyway, so we went to this camp called Riot, and at that camp there was a woman called Cheryl Reeves. So you will know her as Pastor Cheryl Reeves, and she was the daughter of a woman who took her, Cheryl Reeves, to Sunday school most Sundays of her childhood. And at Sunday school, because her mom was faithful in the moments of taking her daughter to children's church weekly, she got saved. So that's a moment. So here we have a moment of a couple getting married in 1996, colliding with a moment with a woman 30 to 40 years ago taking her child to children's church and getting her saved. And it all comes together for a moment at Riot that changed my life, because on the floor of the tabernacle, the room was called, I got saved. And God turned my life around 180 degrees because of this moment and that moment and that moment. A small story. And that story kind of continues more. I asked more people involved in my story a little bit of the lineage, but we don't have the time for me to share that. But it's just beautiful to see that. Another story is actually my husband's story, CJ over there. And I asked him if I could steal it because it was just so powerful. But in 2008, his mom, Almarie, bought tickets to a crusade or like a Christian event. Have you ever bought tickets to an event? A Christian event? Well, we can give you the opportunity when we have our next conference to do that. No, I'm kidding. Shameless plug. But Auntie Almarie bought tickets to a crusade, and to give you a little bit of background, CJ was born with a chronic illness called cystic fibrosis. And when he was born, the doctors told his mom he wouldn't last the day, and then they said he wouldn't last 2 days, and then they said the first year, after the first 2 years, he wouldn't make it. 6 years, 12 years, 16 years, and there he is at 33. Yeah, worth the cheer. And there's much more to that story. So he, at that time, was very sick, but his mom had bought tickets to go to this crusade, so they went to the crusade. And that day, the Holy Spirit did an incredible work in CJ's life, starting his journey to healing and really touching him. And yeah, just a big moment in his life. And I'm forgetting to stick the butterflies, people. A really big moment in his life. And at that same crusade, in a stadium of thousands and thousands of people, there was another man in the stadium called Richard Franzen, and he felt a tug from the Holy Spirit to go and make connection with CJ, who was on the stage being prayed for. So he went down and they made a connection. And I'm putting a 20-year story into a few minutes, so I'm really missing some of the very cool details. But anyway, Richard invited CJ then to come along to his organization here in Joburg, called Impact Africa, and they do missionary work. So I invited CJ over to come and do a season of missionary work, and CJ was there with him. And eventually that led to CJ coming to Krugersdorp, moving here, but also becoming a member of this church. And I think that deserves another butterfly, because this is where he met his wife. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. All of those moments led to him being here in this church. We met and we got together. And then one of the moments that I really love is because CJ was, acquainted with Impact Africa, the one day they had a post on their social media about the baby homes that they have. And I commented on the post and I said, I would love to come and volunteer and just be a small part even over the weekends. And long story short, that comment, that moment of a social media comment led to God fulfilling a dream that he put in my heart 4 years before, of having a home, which was the dream at the beginning, a home for the vulnerable, to be a voice to the voiceless. But now we're at 5 homes already, and God has taken that much further. And the story continues, but the way that God has used the moments to color in the canvas. This canvas started off white and blank, but it's little moments, like a couple getting married in 1996, that has resulted in the miracles of God being able to come to fruition in 2025. Moments really do matter. Ultimately, the point I want to bring across is that each moment of our lives matter, even the ones that we might not know. The conversation you start up, the person you encourage, the day you show up, the things that you do matter. Again, here's a question for practical implementation. What can you be more intentional with the moments that have been given to me? How can I say when I wake up in the morning, okay, God, what can I do? What moment can I do something today that will bring you glory? Impactful moments are not necessarily the big ones, but actually more often the small ones. So don't get caught up and be like, oh, I have to be the person that gets on a stage or leads an organization or does this. The small things matter. And as you're faithful in the small, God will reward you with more. There's a quote by Mother Teresa that says, we are not called to be successful. We are called to be faithful. There's another quote that I don't have on the screen, but that I've come to love. It's by Hudson Taylor that says, expect great things from God, but attempt great things for God, which is so cool. Some biblical moments that seem small or seem like just a flap of a butterfly's wings that show up in the Bible is something that I want to share with you in the next few moments. So it's true both today in my life, in CJ's life, and I'm sure if you look within your life, you'll see how a small butterfly effect, a small moment has become something big and has become something great. And we want to look at that in a few stories in the Bible as well. I will have the references and the scriptures on the screen, but for the sake of time, we won't read through all of them, but you will get the gist of what happens in the story. So number one, everyone say number one. The call of Andrew and Peter. Matthew 4, verse 18 to 20. The small choice in this story was that Jesus called Simon Peter and his brother Andrew while they were fishing by the Sea of Galilee, asking them to follow him and become fishers of men. The immediate impact that had was Andrew and Peter left their nets and followed Jesus, becoming his disciples. The long-term impact of that small moment was Peter would go on to become one of the primary leaders in the early church, preaching the first sermon on the day of Pentecost, where over 3,000 people were saved. Spreading the gospel throughout Jerusalem and beyond. Andrew also preached in various places, and his actions helped establish the church in different regions. Then the conversion of Saul, Acts 9, verse 1 to 19. A small choice, Saul, later called Paul, chose to persecute Christians, believing that it was the right thing for him to do with his faith. However, his encounter with Jesus, his moment with Jesus, his encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus changed the direction of his life forever. The immediate impact was Saul was blinded, and then he was healed, and then baptized by Ananias, and his name was changed to Paul. He immediately began preaching Christ. Long-term impact, and this is so cool. Paul became one of the most influential apostles, spreading the gospel to the Gentiles across the Roman Empire. He wrote much of the New Testament, establishing foundational teachings for the Christian church and its growth. The last biblical example comes from 2 Kings 5, verse 1 to 14. The faithful servant of Naaman. The small choice was a young Israelite girl taken captive by the Arameans chose to speak up when she learned that Naaman, the general of the Aramean army, was suffering from leprosy. She suggested that he visit the prophet Elijah in Israel. The immediate impact: Naaman went to Elisha and was healed after dipping in the Jordan River 7 times. The long-term impact: Naaman's healing led him to faith in God, in the God of Israel, and he returned to his homeland a changed man, declaring that he would worship only the God of Israel, and he even subtly contributed to the spread of God's fame beyond Israel. Small moments, if we pay attention, can have such a huge effect. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31, whether you eat, drink, or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Do it all for the glory of God. So if you're a mom at home and you're looking after tiny kids and it feels like that's the only thing that you ever do it all for the glory of God, because what you're investing in them, that's church. That's the hard work. If you're someone who cleans houses, pray over those people's house. Maybe your prayer will change the blessing that comes into their life. If you're a CEO or you own a business, do that with the intention of knowing that this moment, every meeting, every encounter with staff, every business decision that I make, how I spend the money, whether I'm going to take part in corruption or not, I make decisions for the glory of God. If you show up for your reception job day by day, faithfully, doing things that you're not even supposed to be doing and definitely don't get compensated for, you are doing it for the glory of God. And when we live like that, our lives get so much more meaning. The person that irritates you at work becomes an opportunity. That wasn't written down, but thanks, Uncle Kitchener. God has given you moments. He has given me moments. Moments with the potential to have eternal consequence, good and bad. There's moments that we might be missing where we could have led someone to salvation. But there's also moments that are coming that we can lead people to salvation. Moments have potential and eternal consequence. Will you be a butterfly willing to flap your wings in every area and every moment of your life to make waves of change? Galatians 5 verse 13 says, you, my brothers and sisters, are called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, but rather use it to serve one another humbly in love. As I was preparing for this message, I also just got the sense to share a more recent testimony with you. And to be honest, part of this testimony is kind of embarrassing for me, where I messed up, so I'm going to come clean. But it's amazing what God can do with obedience. So in 2023, I said it in the first service too, but there's a lot of dates in this preach. I'm not a very numbers person, so it's kind of weird. But anyway, in 2023, we had Life Conference here at church with Pastor Jason Render, and I was on the worship team the one day. And as I was standing probably right about here, there was a woman sitting over there that actually, I had the experience of her lighting up. It was very obvious that God was speaking to me about her. And God very clearly spoke, not audibly, but very clearly gave me the impression to give this woman a certain sum of money. And I was very well aware that I did not have that sum of money in my bank account or in my access. So I'm praising and I'm like, God is speaking and I don't have the money. What am I going to do? Trying to figure this out. And after the conference or that day ended, I went to my husband and we spoke about it and we were like, yeah, no, he confirms as the Minister of Finance in our house, we definitely do not have that sum of money to give. So kind of what now? So for 8 months, which that is the embarrassing part, for 8 months, I struggled with this. And I was going back and forth, and I was like, God, we don't really have the money to do this. I don't have the money to do this. And then flesh gets involved as well. So if there is a little bit of money involved, then you're like, oh, but I totally need to do this. This is more important. So I'm not saying use any excuse. I strongly advise, if God tells you to do something, do it immediately. Don't take that from this story. But for 8 months, I struggled with it. And I was like, God, I want to be faithful to you, but I don't have the money. So eventually, after 8 months, we woke up, we found a way to win, and we decided, okay, we're going to pay it off. We don't have the lump sum, but we can pay it off. So I go to the lady at church. She's a faithful member of this church. I go to her at church on Sunday, and I explain to her the whole situation, and I give her the amount that we want to pay off monthly for 6 months. And she just kind of you could just see in her face, she was like, what? Because it turns out that she had lost her job and she currently didn't have an income, and the exact amount of money that we were going to pay monthly was the rent that would cover her rent amount. So God totally knew that we would struggle with that for 8 months, and the timing would be perfect for her to have rent money. She eventually did find a job, praise God, so that's awesome. And now at the end of February was actually the last payment to that of being obedient to God. And please, I don't want to, it's not about me. I'm not telling this story to have anything to do about me. What I'm telling this story for is, even though there might be moments where God calls you to do something difficult, or calls you to do something that you feel is out of your wheelhouse and you don't know how, you don't know where, find a way. Find a way. Practice ingenuity. Pastor Noel always used to say, find a way to win. Make a plan. Find a way to win, to make what God has called you possible. It might not happen immediately. You might need to be faithful. You might need to strategize. You might need to ask for advice. But be faithful in the moments that God has called you to. Find a way to be obedient to God, even if it's hard. Be creative. Be faithful in the small moments. He will turn them for good. I want to read Galatians 5, verse 13 as we end off. You, my brothers and sisters, are called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh, but rather use it to serve one another humbly in love.